All right, let's begin February 23rd. Y'all begin with the starter, please. Pretty straightforward. I know if you did the Ed Puzzle video because I got that score from there. So I'm not going to look at that for the starter today, but I am going to look at the vocabulary that you were expected to do. So what I want you to do is simply check off the options here of the correct statements. Okay, first one here, the transatlantic slave trade refers to the transportation of enslaved Africans across the Atlantic Ocean to the Americas. If that's true, you obviously check that off. If it's not, you won't. Agency is the ability for someone to make their own decisions. Indentured servant is someone that is free to make their own decisions. And disembark means to get on a ship or boat. So go ahead and complete that starter. You have 1 minute. All right, let's look at the summary page here. We're going to continue to identify the causes and analyze the impact of the transatlantic slave trade. Analyze the effects of social, economic, military, and political conflict among nations, regions, and groups. This is our North Carolina Standard Course of Study. Unit will be for the rest of this quarter, again, Africa and the Middle East, and discontent creates change is the statement of inquiry. So you completed the February 23rd starter. We're going to begin 97 transatlantic slave trade maps and then finish with the ticket out the door, the February 23rd ticket out the door. Asynchronous work is to complete page 97 transatlantic slave trade maps. So let's go to that page now. Go to page 97, both in Canvas and the digital notebook. I'll give you 30 seconds. So let's take a look here. Let's look at map one. I'm just going to kind of give you an overview of the maps, and then I want you to use your map reading skills in order to answer the questions that you see on that document, okay, in the digital notebook. So if I'm looking at this map, and I'm going to control plus here so it zooms in a little bit, okay, so I can, all right, quality of the map stays, okay, it's a high quality image, so we're able to look at it. Now, if I'm looking at this map, right, let's review a little bit. We obviously have maybe a compass rose somewhere. I sure hope we do, but that doesn't look like we do. So maybe we can assume, right, north, south, east, and west on this map. We do have a scale so we can identify everything, okay? But we have the oceans are labeled. The continents are labeled, okay? We have some seas labeled as well. And then it looks like maybe we have some specific countries labeled, okay? Along this along this coast, we have the United States, Cuba, okay? We have some countries, specific countries labeled as well. But the main focus here, right, if you're looking, is the arrows. So we go over here to the key. Overview of the slave trade out of Africa. Okay, that'd be the title of the map. Number of slaves, okay, and it is represented here. So if I'm looking at this, right, the width of the routes indicates the number of slaves transported. Okay, and so if we're looking, it's going to see that, man, a lot probably came from this area, right? The larger arrow. And then we have some smaller lines, and then we have some very slim lines, look like maybe going up here. Okay, so that's what the information, you need to take that map reading skills to allow you to answer the questions on this chart. So let's go over here. Let's take a look at these questions. So we have some exploration questions, which you should be able to answer pretty straightforward, but then you have drawing conclusions where you're going to need to take another step forward and determining the answer and think for yourself a little bit in answering those questions. So number one here for map 1, on which continent in the New World did enslaved Africans end up during the trade? Which continent in the New World did enslaved Africans end up during the trade? So go ahead and look at that now. Okay. And then the next question, where did the largest amount of enslaved Africans embark? Okay. So that's where you got to use the terminology disembark and embark. Okay. And determine what that would be. Okay. So go ahead. I'll give you a little bit of time for you to answer those questions, and then we'll move to the drawing conclusions. Now, if I'm looking at that first question, right, it kind of makes me think that there should be only one continent, but I would include two. There are two continents. So I would say, on which two continents in the New World did the enslaved Africans end up during the trade? So let's look at this map and determine that here for you. So let's look. So the New World is technically considered this area in the Western Hemisphere. This is technically in the Eastern Hemisphere considered the Old World. Okay, where civilization was before, okay, traditionally speaking, right? And I guess, we're probably even speaking from more a European perspective. And so we try not to look at the world through just a European lens. But if we did determine that this was the Old World and this was the New World, the enslaved Africans would have come to both continents in the Western world, in the Western Hemisphere, in the New World, the so-called New World. So you could put there North America and South America as those two continents for that first question. Okay. Then we look at the second one. Let's see what you have as well. Okay. Where did the largest amount of enslaved Africans embark? Okay. Which means to get on the ship. Okay. So if we're looking at that, they embarked mostly, right? See if you got this right. West Central Africa. Got this larger, thick arrow or line that connects to the arrow, showing that a large amount of Africans were enslaved and embarked on the ship from West Central Africa. Okay. All right, let's continue here. I want you, let's do this here. Okay, it is your responsibility to finish the drawing conclusions during asynchronous time. So why do you think that the West African coast appears to be the center of this trade? And how did the amount of enslaved Africans sent to North America and South America compare? And was this comparison surprising? Were you surprised by this difference, or based on what you've been told or thought or assumed about the transatlantic slave trade? Okay, let's move down to map number 2. We're looking at like winds at this point. So let's look here at what we're looking at. Okay, wind and ocean currents. Okay, wind and ocean currents. So if you take a look, we do not, we have our key down here at the bottom, wind and ocean currents of the Atlantic basins. Blue represents the ocean currents and red represents the wind currents. So let me walk you through this. Based on the currents, where would you expect enslaved Africans who embarked near the equator to end up? Okay, so you got the skill, right? The equator being the, I'll let you kind of figure that out. So if they embarked around the equator, most likely, where would they end up in the so-called New World, in the Americas? Okay, and then if slave ships traveled from Northwest Africa, which winds would they rely on to get to Central America? Okay. And then let's go here, look at the drawing conclusions, because I'm going to let you work on a lot of this on your own. Drawing conclusions. How did winds and currents support the slave trade's growth on the West African coast rather than the other coasts in Africa? Okay, let's move down to map number 3, please. Map number 3. All right. Shrink this a little bit. All right, so take a look, right? Our map reading skills, right? We need to look at the key and identify what that key is telling us, what the purpose is, identify the title of the map to help us determine what it's trying to show us, what it's telling us. So here we have both the title and the key simultaneously. Major coastal regions from which captives left Africa, okay, throughout the entire time of the transatlantic slave trade. And then we need to look at the key and identify what's being communicated. The larger the circle appears to be, the larger the amount of enslaved Africans that embarked on the ships for the transatlantic slave trade. Going down to, if you go a little bit smaller of a circle, then you have what looks like 2 million, then 1 million, and then 500,000 is the smallest circle there. So use that knowledge, okay, and skills to help you determine the answers to these questions. How many enslaved Africans embarked in West Central Africa? Which locations had the smallest amount of enslaved Africans embark? And then looking at the map, from which location would enslaved Africans have the longest journey to the New World and why? Okay, that is map 3. Let's take a look at map number 4. All right. So this is now the disembark, the map that's going to show us where the enslaved Africans disembarked throughout the transatlantic slave trade. Make it a little bit smaller so we can see a little bit more of the map. So we're going to see again the title of the map, major regions where captives disembarked all throughout this time. And then we have 2 million, the larger circle, 1 million, slightly smaller, okay, down to 500,000 is the second smallest, and then looks like 100,000 is the tiny circle. So use that knowledge to help you answer, okay, the questions from the document. And if I'm looking at this, trying to interpret and figure it out, it looks like maybe the map, the circles are a little bit more fluid, where there's not just going to be 4 distinct numbers. Maybe there are some that are even smaller, because if I'm looking at northern United States up here, that looks like it's smaller than 100,000. So for me, I may determine that maybe less than 100,000 disembarked in that port, right? And look, we got some numbers over here too. We gotta, okay, be aware and look at that in the technically the old world, right? All right, let's look at the questions for map 4. Looking at the map, which area had many points of disembarkation? Okay, where were there just a massive amount of ports where enslaved Africans got off the ship? Which location was the largest disembarkation point? And how many enslaved Africans disembarked in the Carolinas in the Georgia region? Okay. And then look at this. Why do you think certain regions had more enslaved Africans disembark, whereas others had none or very few numbers? So you have to draw conclusions and kind of hypothesize a bit, infer, and come up with what you think would be the reason for that. Okay. So that is what you are doing today. That is your focus today, using those 4 maps. Okay. Any questions, please make sure you put them in the chat. Put them in the chat so I can address them. And then we'll move on in a couple minutes to the ticket out the door. All right, so everybody should be clear on what's expected of them throughout for asynchronous work today. But let's go to the ticket out the door, and then I'll be here to support you as well if you need assistance or have any questions with the map. So February 23rd, ticket out the door. Objective, unit, statement of inquiry, and then what is today's asynchronous work. So please answer those questions. Thank you.